everyone. Welcome back to my channel on human design. I'm Praggya Beniwal, and so far in our cosmology series, we've discussed how the universe was conceived at the Big Bang, where two containing the two aspects and the antineutrino field collided with the Bhan, which contained the prime design crystal and the prime magnetic monopole. The two aspects manifested the cellular body of the universe, while the bundle containing some of the Bhan aspects, the prime design crystal, antineutrino field, and prime magnetic monopole, remained at the core of the explosion and moved slower. At some point, the bundle reached the stars of the wall and another massive explosion took place. The prime design crystal shattered eventually, leading to the creation of Rave personality crystals. In other words, this was the initiation of imitation consciousness as well as the beginning of the development of the Ajna center of the universe. The prime magnetic monopole also went out for a cosmic spin and shattered into many smaller magnetic monopoles. The antineutrino field got realized as a neutrino field, a web of consciousness of communication through which local programming can begin to take place. This was the beginning of the universe that we can conceptualize or know as human beings. Now moving on to the next part, talking about the global orchestration directory that programs human beings and everything that resides in our world. If you haven't watched part 1, 2, and 3 of the Cosmology series, please make sure you do that before watching this video, as it would really help set a lot of context that I refer to in this video. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying this series so far. If you are, please make sure to leave me a comment down below, as it really motivates me to continue sharing about this topic, which I find highly interesting. I think it's important to remember that these events that happen and the way in which that they're described, it almost seems like this happens and then that is created and then it goes from there to the next thing. But actually, this entire process takes billions of years, somewhere around 13 to 15 billion years to now, to where we are now. So this shattering happens, a programming agency comes into place. But what that programming agency is and what it actually does and how does it actually function is described by Ra by describing some of the most important core aspects of this prime design crystal. These core aspects of the prime design crystal continued to travel in space for a very, very long time and eventually led to the creation of our solar system. At the center of these core aspects was the center. And Ra says, first of all, the business of the center. Imagine you have a crystal and you pass a beam of light through it. The light, filtered by the crystal, manifests a pattern. Imagine then that you shatter this crystal into untold trillions of fragments. Each fragment having the same beam of light pass through it will manifest a unique pattern. All that is except one. One fragment will manifest the same pattern in microcosm. This is the center. So it's very important to grasp what the center represents is a microcosmic crystal that actually has the same potential as the whole. So essentially, the center is the part of the prime design crystal that didn't really shatter because everything shattered from it. It is the part of the prime design crystal that remained exactly in perspective as the entire prime design crystal. And Ra specifically mentions that this is not the middle point, it's the center, meaning that some fractal lines were longer than other fractal lines. Now, it's also important to mention that just like the Bhan has these core aspects, so does the Tugh, and the core aspects of the Tugh have found their way to the center of the earth, whereas this core aspect, the center specifically that we've spoken about so far, actually rests in our sun. The center of the Bhan, or the center of the prime design crystal, is responsible for maintaining the solar system and the communication of the solar system. So it is responsible for filtering the string at source communication from outside of the Ajna center of the universe. And it is also responsible for filtering the string that emerges out of the dog, which is another aspect of this prime design crystal that has a fractal connection to the center. So the center is basically responsible for the trans-solar conditioning, the conditioning that comes from outside of our solar system. And it is also responsible for filtering the imprint, for filtering the conditioning that the sun itself creates in order to develop the neocortex of the universe. It's also important to know that these core aspects of the Bhan, or the prime design crystal, actually incarnate into form. Ra says that there are two centers, both are now on Earth. The Tugh center manifesting the body of the universe, and the Bhan center manifesting the universal mind. The Tugh center dwells near the core of the Earth and has been there for 2.4 billion years. During the present global round, which began in 16101 BC, the Tugh center has incarnated in Rave form 62 times. The Bhan center dwells in the heart of the stars, at the source of the string, aka the sun. In this round, when not at its place at the heart of the Rave sun, it has incarnated 8 times. So that's an interesting thing to find out, that these programming agencies, and we'll talk about other programming agencies through which we receive our conditioning, or through which this incarnation program is held, or through which this experiment of creating an imitation personality is created, that these programming agencies actually incarnate either in Rave form or not Rave forms, maybe in plants, as animals, or as an inanimate object, to actually see, to actually gauge, well, how is this consciousness program developing? Is it working? The first generation fractal to the center are the dog and the camel. And what I mean by first generation fractal is that these were the aspects that were last to shatter away from the center. And in essence, all other shattered crystal aspects that exist in the universe get to experience the center through the dog and the camel. There is no way for us to get to the programming of the center unless it was to go through the dog and the camel. The dog also lives in the heart of the sun, just like the center, and the dog is actually responsible for filtering the string of this solar system. So essentially, it is the dog that sends out the primary conditioning for this solar system. The dog produces neutrinos, produces a string of neutrinos, which is then filtered by the center, which also filters the string that is coming from outside of the solar system. And then this neutrino information is then filtered by the camel. The camel is also first generation fractal to the center. And the camel also lives in the sun. This is the Holy Trinity, and it lives in the sun, the center, the dog, and the camel. The camel is actually never stationary. So the camel rotates around the dog exactly in unison with the planet Mercury. And so once the dog creates the neutrino string and the center filters it and combines it with trans-solar conditioning, the camel then filters this conditioning coming from the center and actually stops the center from directly informing Mercury. And everything that reaches humanity comes to us through Mercury. And actually, Ra says that it is the camel that is fundamentally responsible for conditioning human consciousness, and also that it is the camel that is the civilizing agent of human consciousness. The second generation fractal to the center are the four corners, and these live in Jupiter, which is a planet, and Alcyone, Sirius, and Dubhe, which are stars. The voice told Ra that these four programming agencies are actually really integral for the programming of Raves and can be considered almost as centers when it comes to the conditioning of the Raves. These four corners also establish the archetype of the four quarters, of these four different processes that humanity moves through again and again and again. And in essence, they are responsible for the orchestration and the organization of the entire reincarnation process. The voice also mentioned that Alcyone, Dubhe, and Sirius do not directly interact with Rave personality crystals because Rave personality crystals are not capable of translating the frequency that is coming from these stars. But these three stars actually organize humanity and imprint humanity and condition humanity through Jupiter, and specifically through the moons of Jupiter. So it is Jupiter that becomes really important in translating the frequencies coming from these programming agencies. The four big moons of Jupiter are responsible for translating these frequencies and play a major role in conditioning humanity. Sirius info is translated by Io, Dubhe is translated by Ganymede, Alcyone is translated by Europa, and Jupiter by Callisto. And what Ra also communicates is that it is the magnetic field between Jupiter and its moon where all programming information for Raves is stored, and it is the place which is also commonly known as Akashic Records. It is essentially a record of all incarnation that has taken place so far for humans and that will take place in the future. The third generation fractal from the center are the 16 faces, and these 16 faces or crystals reside in the personality crystal bundles in the atmosphere of the earth. And as we know, this is where all personality crystals that incarnate come from. This is where all the souls that are looking to incarnate actually reside before they incarnate into a physical form. Essentially, these 16 faces are instruments of translating higher frequencies and communicating those frequencies to human beings in a way that we can actually grasp it. So now we can very clearly see that it is within the dog that the neutrino string is produced, which then moves to the center. The center takes in this local string and also combines it with trans-solar programming, which then moves to the camel, which then communicates it to Mercury. It moves through all the different planets and gets to Jupiter, Alcyone, Sirius, and Dubhe. And these are also, by the way, creating their own neutrinos. So then that is combined together, which then moves down to the 16 faces. And then that information is then translated and moved through human personality crystals. And this is how you and I are conditioned by the larger forces. Ra also mentioned the fourth generation fractal from the center, which is the 66 sides. And basically, these are personality crystals that live in different stars. And he says that each one of us is on a fractal line to one of these 66 sides, which essentially represents 66 different pathways to the truth or the center. That's quite a spectacular consciousness program. And what I find really fascinating is also that Ra explains some of these concepts that humanity as a whole is obsessed with, some of these concepts that have existed for time immemorial, like the concept of monotheism. And essentially, he says that humanity as a whole cannot let go of this idea that everything goes back to one, because actually, for us, for raves, for human beings, everything does go back to the center. And then he talks about how that in so many traditions, there's the Holy Trinity. And essentially, what that is going back to the center, the dog, and the camel. He also talks about that there are many traditions that focus on the fours, like the wind, fire, water, earth, and then he brings it down another level and he talks about how every other kind of God that has ever existed can be found in one of the 16 faces, in one of the Godheads. And that every pathway to truth, every kind of learning can then be divided into these 66 sides. And the reason that humanity has come up with these different concepts or way of understanding our own process or understanding our existence is because we are heavily conditioned by these programming forces. And in some way, we have a sense of these different programming agencies that exist because we are deeply, deeply, deeply conditioned by them. That's quite a lot to take in. But I wanted to leave you with this quote from Ra. You'll notice something about rave cosmology in what we've been through over these 9 weeks. The only thing we've been looking at are crystals of consciousness. That's the heart and soul of our story together. It is what we are, it is what life is all about, it is what the program is, and it all operates through these crystals of consciousness. And the medium is the neutrino. Here you have this fundamental perfect binary, the neutrino data potential and the crystal filtering potential. Magic. You put the two of them together and you have consciousness. And so at the deepest level, to really see that this is our program, it's not them, and we're the victim, it's our program together. In the end, we're only looking at one thing, one entity. It has nothing to do with our delusion of being separate and alone and tiny and pointless. There's this vast life. It's a vast life. And what this cosmology says is the most important thing of all. It says this vast life is conscious, and that's what it's all about, bringing consciousness into form. And the perfect formula to bring consciousness into form is neutrino and crystal. And that's rave cosmology.